Today we're fortunate to have with us Professor Takeshi Inomata, who is a professor of anthropology at the University of Arizona. He received both his bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Tokyo and went on to earn his PhD in anthropology from Vanderbilt University in 1995. And this is where he began his important work on the ancient Maya and their collapse at the site of Agua Teca, which is located in the Petén region of northern Guatemala. Professor Inomata is taught as an assistant professor at Yale University after his graduation from Vanderbilt, and subsequently took a position at the University of Arizona in the School of Anthropology in 2000, where he now works, as I mentioned before. He was recently awarded the Agnes Nelms-Haury Chair in Environmental and Social Justice, which was established to honor, reward, and encourage outstanding faculty at the University of Arizona who study environment, social justice, and/or the Southwest. Professor Inomata's work in the Maya region is highly regarded by the archaeological community and beyond. Much of his research includes financial support from various granting institutions, including the National Science Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Alphawood Foundation, and the National Geographic Society. Professor Inomata is currently residing in Washington, D.C., where he's completing a fellowship in residence at Dumbarton Oaks, an institute of Harvard University that houses a world-class collection of resources on pre-Columbian studies and others from around the globe. His current work is at the site of Ceibal, another Mayan city, which is located on the border of Guatemala and Mexico, where he's exploring the roots of Maya civilization, for which he'll be talking about today. I'm especially excited to have Professor Inomata here at BYU because I feel he is really a model example of maintaining a balance in archaeological research that so many scholars fail to achieve. I really see his work as inciting intellectual exploration in various realms of social theory, but is solidly grounded in dirt archaeology. And I really appreciate that. He and his teams have moved a lot of dirt over the last 20 years or so. He also has a strong record of public outreach, which is really rare among academic archaeologists, and should be commended for that. One other aspect of Professor Inomata's work is that he really had moved in his research in the Maya region away from ceremonial courts and temples to households. And his work really does show the importance of studying people in their most common setting, which is in the house and with their families. So without further ado, let us welcome Professor Inomata.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Can you hear me? I'd like to thank also Dr. Johnson and Dr. Clark and the Department of Anthropology for this kind invitation to give a talk here. For us, Mesoamerican archaeologists, Brigham Young University is the center of the world. Much of the important work about the origins of Mesoamerican civilization has been done here at Brigham Young University, particularly by the New World Archaeological Foundation. So I'm really honored to give this talk here. So let me see if I can make this work. Okay, so today I'd like to talk about the origins of Maya civilization, focusing on the site of Ceibal where we work. Ceibal is located in the southwestern part of this Maya lowland. It's in Guatemala. And then this is the general chronology that I'll be talking about. So first, the classic period, it was generally considered as the heyday of Maya civilization. They had the beautiful stela with sophisticated writing system and those magnificent temples. But the work by Dr. Matheny, Dr. Forsyth, and other people showed that there was a significant development already during the pre-classic, late pre-classic period with those magnificent temples of Mirador and other places. Then to study the origin of Maya civilization, now it's clear that we have to look at the period before, that's middle preclassic period. But when we get to the beginning of middle preclassic period, about 1000 BC, generally you just get those very unimpressive ceramics. Then when you get to period before, that's early preclassic period, we don't have even ceramics in Maya lowlands. You get some of those projectile points used by hunting, gathering people, mainly in Belize. In the rest of Maya lowland, we don't even have archaeological remains. Then, we started the excavation at Seibao. Then we found a rather remarkable find. We found this very elaborate ritual deposit and then formal ceremonial construction dating to the beginning of middle preclassic period. This shows that there was a very elaborate ritual practice and then pretty substantial construction project dating to the very beginning of the sedentary way of life. Then we can see some parallels, analogy in other parts of the world. Famous case is Peru, this temple of Kotosh, dating to pre-ceramic period. Now we have an even earlier example from the coastal area. So people are building those elaborate temples before they settle down completely, before they started to use ceramics in those areas. Then other example comes from American Southeast. This is famous center of Poverty Point, again dating to pre-ceramic period. Now we have even earlier example of Watson Break, which was basically made, this substantial mound group was made by hunting, gathering people who are doing mobile lifeway. Then remarkable example came relatively recently from Turkey, this site of Göbekli Tepe, dating to 9000 BC. So this is the really very beginning of agriculture. Basically, they were hunter-gatherers moving around, but sometimes they gathered to build these remarkable monuments with those carvings. So these findings make us reconsider old model of archaeology. All days people thought you have first agriculture, then that led to bigger community, then that led to more elaborate ritual. But now we have substantial evidence that shows that those elaborate rituals emerged very, very early time period. Then Seibao is much later than those examples from other parts of the world. It's not even the beginning of agriculture, but these people had domesticated plants for 1,000 years before in Mesoamerica, before the beginning of Seibao. But this was actually major turning point in agriculture in Mesoamerica. This was probably the time maize became very important. Before that, agriculture was probably pretty small part of people's diet. Also, there's another important difference from other parts of the world. Seibao is clearly secondary development, not the pristine development like Göbekli Tepe. When Seibao was emerging, there was already a remarkable civilization of Olmec civilization on the Gulf Coast area with this big center of La Venta. There was even significant development early on centered on San Lorenzo, who was already making this kind of colossal head, while Maya people are still running around hunting animals in Maya lowland. Then, so this gives a little bit different situation, but still, this make us think about this role of rituals in those early days of transition to sedentary agricultural communities. Then in this talk, I'd like to focus on three main issues. One is this question of Olmec connection, relation with Olmecs. Then this is really a very much heated debate among scholars. Some people say it was Olmec influence that made this Maya civilization. Other people, particularly many Maya archaeologists, want to say that the Maya civilization developed locally without much of Olmec influence in this Maya lowland. But my view is sort of in between of those polarized positions. I think that it was not quite direct influence from La Venta, but the interregional interaction was very important. Then we have to look at not just the Olmec area, but other areas, particularly this inland Chiapas, where New World Archaeological Foundation did substantial work, and then the southern Pacific coast, where Dr. Clark has been working. The second issue is the development in Maya lowlands. Many of my colleagues working in Maya area wants to say there was very early Maya sedentary community dating to early pre-classic period. But I don't think there is a good evidence for it. Actually, in my view, current evidence says that all those sedentary community in Maya lowland emerged around 1000 BC or later, about the time that the Seiba was emerging. So that also made us think that this emergence of maize as an important crop that basically correspond to that time, that timing. Then I'd like to look at local process that was happening at Seibao. So my view is that this transition to maize agriculture didn't lead to society-wide change immediately. Actually, I think there were people who are maintaining traditional mobile way of life, while some people are adapting agricultural sedentary way of life. So then this brings us back to the issue of ritual. I think rituals probably provided the space of gathering, and then also arena of negotiation among those different people who led different ways of life, then eventually contributed to the establishment of fully sedentary agricultural communities. So I started to work at Seibao in 2005. Seibao is famous among Maya archaeologists because Harvard did a major archaeological project in the 60s. So after 40 years after Harvard's work, we went back to this site and to examine particularly early period. So at the beginning, the work by Dr. Clark and then also work by Dr. Garrett Law of the foundation gave me lots of inspirations. What they said was that in Chiapas, during this period, middle pre-classic period, there was this very formalized spatial ceremonial complexes, which Dr. Clark calls middle formative Chiapas pattern, which consists of what we call E group. E group is a formal ceremonial complex with the western pyramid and the eastern long mound. Then around it, you have this big platform arranged along the northeast line. So this is the site of San Isidro from Chiapas. Then Olmec Center of La Venta itself has this pattern. You have an E group formation in the center, and then those big mounds are arranged along the north-south line. Then this pattern, spatial pattern, went with a specific ritual deposit. Dr. Law found that this deposit cache with greenstone axes or arranged in this cruciform form along the center line of E group. La Venta, this E group has not been really excavated well, but the excavation in this northern part, complex A, found lots of caches, Some of them are in this cruciform pattern with greenstone axis. So this is not the superficial similarity that's tied to specific ritual practices and religious ideas. Then I looked at the Seibao pattern before I excavated. This is the view of Seibao. It's right on the river, Passion River, and then there's a very steep escarpment. Then the early settlement are in this part, which is called Group A, which was originally found by Harvard. Then when I look at this map of Group A, this is the final form of Group A, dating to Classic period. But I thought this looks like a sort of like a Chiapas Pattern. In the center, you have Group E, and then you have those big platforms arranged along north-south line. So I thought that probably at the very beginning of Seibao, they followed this Chiapas pattern. Then my goal of excavation originally was to check it, to test it, if there was this Chiapas pattern originally from the very beginning of Seibao community. So those red squares are our excavation unit. So what we did is we did a very focused excavation to test this hypothesis. So because early remains are covered by later construction, so you have to dig very big holes, deep holes, to get to early period. So we chose those places and then focused our effort to this area. First, we dug this center line of this supposed E group. Then we went through many of those plaza floors. We got to 2 meters deep. Then we hit the bedrock. My colleague, Guatemalan colleague, Otto Roman, was excavating this pit, and then Otto told me, we hit the bedrock. I said, damn, we are supposed to find those Chiapas-style cache here. But I said, where is my cache? And he said, no, And so I said, damn, just dig the bedrock. So he started to dig bedrock for a few days, and then after a few days, he told me, Mira, come and see. Then I went to see it. Then there was this beautiful cache in the exact Chiapas pattern. So what happened was that when they established this community of Seibao, they scraped all this humus, black humus, and they exposed this clean bedrock, or actually it's weathering limestone marl. Then use this exposed bedrock as the first plaza floor, and then they dug this hole and they put this axis, and then put back the same soil. So you couldn't see it on the surface, but you have this elaborate ritual. So this really dates to the beginning of Seibao, about 1000 BC or 950. So we are happy, so we started to dig this big pyramid. But this is pretty challenging because there's a big later construction. We want to get down to the really core part. So we tried the various places, and then finally we decided to do tunnel. So this is the pit where we found this cache. Then we decided to do tunnel towards the center of the pyramid. So what we did is we dug through this mostly natural soil. So this is natural bedrock, and then we followed this first floor. The idea was if we follow the first floor, eventually we will hit the first building. So this is the tropics. It's very hot. And then if you go into the tunnel, you may think it's cooler, but actually it's hotter. It's like a sauna. So I decided to send one of my graduate students here, so I called Raul. So I told Raul, why don't you go there and dig this tunnel? And then Raul was digging all this tunnel one season and didn't find anything. So then we went back next year and kept digging. Then sometime on the way, we found cache. But it can be pretty tricky. You can find cache in the ceiling of your excavation. So you have to do reverse excavation, then you have to sort of improvise the excavation method, which is pretty tricky, but so that's what happened. So Raul was digging here almost 20 meters into this tunnel, deep into this pyramid. Then finally he found something. So this is the first floor, plaza floor. This is the scraped bedrock. Then you see that this bedrock goes up. So this is the ramp to the first building. So first building was carved out of this natural rise of bedrock. Then we went on further. So you see that this line. We went on, then we found that this is the central part of building. So in the central part, on top of this bedrock, they put additional fill of black stuff. But it's only like a 2 meter high. You see this very nice floor, that's the earliest building. That dates to about 950 BC. So that's really the earliest building. So there was this building we were looking for. Then so that made us happy, and then we moved on to this side. Then we dug, we thought originally there's this long mound on this side. Then we went down, we went down almost 8 meters, but this building is late. It goes back to only 400 years. So I said, what happened? We have to dig this central part. We were digging central part. Actually, there were older building in the central part. There was an original early long building here dating again to 950. Then they moved it to the east. The second building was here dating to about 700 BC. Then they moved again to this final position around 400 BC. So this is the view of the earliest building. Again, this was carved out of this natural bedrock, and then they had ramp instead of stairs. It was very low. It was almost like a raised edge of plaza rather than well-defined platform. But anyway, so we found the E group that we are looking for. Then we did this excavation of this big platform. So we were determined to get down to the bottom of it. So we started big, originally 10 by 8. And then as you go down, we reduce the size. Again, working in the tropics, the problem is the mosquitoes. You have lots of mosquitoes. And then when you get down to the pits, you may think there are no mosquitoes, but there are more mosquitoes down in the pit. So I decided to send one of my graduate students, it's called Victor. So I told Victor, why don't you go down and dig this pit? So poor Victor was digging this pit for 4 seasons. It took 4 seasons. And then finally, after 4 seasons, he got down to this natural soil. But result is pretty remarkable. We see that the earliest building, again dating to 950. Then you see many layers of constructions. And then by 800 BC, it was already 5 meter high. And then probably was almost 30 meter wide. It was very substantial construction by 800 BC. Then we went down, we did also excavation of another platform, this northeastern platform. Here, my wife, Daniela Triadine, was excavating. So I had to be very careful here. So if I say, why don't you dig here? And she's going to kick me. So I was moving cautiously, and then I asked her, how about digging here? And so we sort of moved on. Then we did find this remain of probable residential building under 5 meter of fill, dating to about 600 BC. Then we encountered a problem. We found this loose fill. Once you have loose fill, if you go down farther down, it becomes very dangerous. Then what we do is, in those cases, we consolidate it. So we spend weeks consolidating it. We put net so that stones fall down. So it takes a long time to dig those deep pits. But it was rewarding. We found the earliest version of those possible residential building on top of this big platform. It was pretty nicely organized. The early version was made of clay, dating to 800 BC. Then there are other pits, so we cannot expose whole thing. We see a bit of it, bit over here, but it looks like there was this patio group pattern, which is the traditional formation of residential groups in Maya area and Mesoamerica. So I think this is the early version of emerging elite residential complex dating to 800 BC, not the very beginning. It's a little bit later. So now we can summarize this pattern. At the very beginning, 950 or so, we have this E group, which is a ceremonial complex and then big platform. We don't know the function of this platform. We don't know if it's residence or public building. So that's still a question. Then around 800 BC, they added this version. I think this is an elite residential complex by this time. Then around 700 and later, we see the fully developed Chiapas Pattern with more platforms. And then this E group got expanded as we go on. Then also last year we did LiDAR. Many of you are probably familiar with LiDAR. So you put the equipment on the plane and then they map it by the laser pulse. Ceibao is covered by this rainforest. Just this central part, this temple is exposed. Then in the LiDAR, you see this. This is a profile. This is the laser return from this building. Then you see the pattern of these trees. And then some laser pulse go through the trees. And then you get the ground elevations. Then with this, you can make a map of the area covered by rainforest. This is the central part of Ceibao. This is 1 kilometer square. You see the lots of mound. And then this is the central complex. So there are lots of interesting data here, but I just want to talk about one interesting result, which is this group A. So this is the Chiapas pattern, but outside, it looks sort of like originally it looks like an amorphous pattern. It's big because it's like 500 meters. On the ground, you don't see the whole thing. So then, if you see the LiDAR, you see the very clear, well-defined shape with straight lines. So this is, originally we thought it's like a sort of semi-natural rise, but it's clearly human-made, well-planned building. Probably much of it was made during pre-classic period. It was very substantial construction project. Then main question was chronology. That was the main focus of our work. Then we took over 100 of radiocarbon dates. Many of them are about the pre-classic period. So these dates comes from this earliest building of the E group. You see that we throw away some of the bad dates, then remaining date is pretty consistent, around 950. Then, above it, we get slightly later date. This is the eastern mound. We didn't get the earliest layer, but from later layer, we get a little bit later dates. So pattern is very consistent. We have enough dates to show that the earliest building dates to 950, and then there was a series of construction before 800 BC. Then we compare that to La Venta. So that was the main question. This is the center of La Venta. The data from La Venta is not great. Central part, there's not really great data. But there is this settlement excavation by William Rust. He took a good number of carbon dates, and I looked at it. there are some early dates coming from planted period, but I think this is before the development of lavender. Most of the deposit are from outside. There's only small number of deposit in near the lavender core. There's only one date from this lavender pot. So I think at least lavender was not the big center before 800 BC. There may have been ceremonial construction, but at least lavender didn't have much population. But after 800 BC, that's a Franco phase, situation changes. There are lots of residential construction all around this core. You get lots of dates, all date after 800 BC. So when Seiba was starting, lavender was not yet dominant centers. Lavender became dominant after 800 BC. So that's make me think that it was not the direct influence from lavender that gave initial rise to Seibao and other Maya communities. Then another data is this sequence of caches. Quintessential these caches from lavenders are those cruciform caches with those greenstone axes. Similar ones are found at San Isidro and then Chiapas also in the Chiapas. Then question is date of these deposits. This tradition starts early from the time of San Lorenzo during the early preclassic period. There's this ritual site of El Marati close to San Lorenzo. That's in the Gulf Coast area. And then there, Mexican archaeologists found those axe deposit. But they are not in cruciform shape. They are in those flower petal shape, or axes are laid flat down. Actually, in the Seibao too, we found a lot of those caches with greenstone axes, mainly along the center line of this early E group. But earliest one, they're not cruciform. Like this flat laid down, this is the cache I talked about, and then some are those flower petal pattern. It's like El Manati, like an early preclassic pattern. There's one possible cruciform shape dating to this period, but it's not completely cruciform. They cut this pit in the cruciform, but the objects are all in the center. It's not the axes are not arranged in the cruciform pattern. In the central pit, we found this unfinished so-called Olmec spoon pectoral, and then this damaged greenstone axis. So this might be the prototype of cruciform caches. Then next period, what we call Real II period, before 800 BC, still we don't get much of cruciform pattern. Mostly flatly laid pattern or flower petal pattern. You don't get cruciform pattern. But well, another cache is this one. This is also upside down excavation, or from bottom to top excavation. Here you have a ceramic vessel, but stuck to the vessel at the bottom, that's another Olmec style spoon. But this dates before 800 BC. Also on the side, we found that this spoon made of shell. Those are pectorals, probably. Then, after 800 BC, there's a change in pattern. Then, this cruciform pattern becomes very common at Seibao. We found this nice cruciform with axes in the cardinal point. And then this is pretty remarkable one. And then this is the one found by Harvard in early days. This is a particularly remarkable one. Those are the object from the cache with beautiful axes, and then particularly this remarkable, this spoon pectoral. Probably some people wear it here. And then this perforator, the theory says that that's for bloodletting ritual. They pierced some part of body. It could be penis. but I haven't tried it. So if any of you want to volunteer, I'll be happy with it. But anyway, also we found the earliest example of pyrite mirrors. I think that's the earliest known pyrite mirror, at least from Maya Laurent. I'm not sure if there's other example from other parts of Mesoamerica. It's very battery burned, but you see those mosaic pieces. Those are from different caches, but dating period after 800 BC. You start to have more elaborate carvings during this period, like this one, and then carved this spondylar shell, which probably represented the trophy head of decapitated head. Also, we found this typical Olmec style figurine head made of stone. We found this from later deposit, but probably this figurine head came to Ceibao sometime between 800 to 600 BC. Then, if we look at outside, La Venta, these one, I think, date period after 800 BC. Same is true for Chiapas also, that dates after 800 BC. That's also the case for San Isidro. And then Maya Laurent, there's only one other this case of cruciform cache with greenstone axis that dates after 800 BC. So after 800 BC, this symbolism of cardinal direction becomes very important, which is also represented in this kind of carving with four corners and then possible maze god in the center. So that's the pattern we get. Then let's look at the Maya Laurent, processing Maya Laurent. So there are important artist sites like Cuello, Carpech, and the Nakbe, where Dr. Forsyth worked. So this is the chronology of Ceibao. And then if we look at chronology of other sites, if you see the publications, chronology look like this. Excavator of Carpech says that these early ceramics appear 1200 BC. And Cuello, Norman Hammond says the early ceramics appear 1200 BC. And Nakbe, Dr. Hansen says that the early old ceramics appear 1000 BC. I understand that Dr. Forsyth has a little bit different idea. But if you look at type of ceramics, I try to show the sort of similar ceramics in similar color. Those are similar to what I call rare 1-2 ceramics. But those people date those ceramics earlier. And then those are similar to our rare 3, and then particularly early Osh is very early. Then I thought maybe something is wrong here. So I looked at actual radiocarbon dates from those sites. Then you might think that I'm trying to make my site older than other places, but not necessarily true. So actually, tendency of archaeologists that archaeologists love early dates. So if you find early dates, many people jump on those early dates, but that's not really good. In case of Cuello, there's just one pre-1000 BC date. Same for Blackman Eddy. Same for Carpech. Carpech, they may have some more dates now, but I looked at all the context and pattern sequence, then I'm pretty sure you have to throw away those early dates. There can be problem of old woods or mixed materials. Then you can get those old dates than real deposit date. Then you have to throw them away. So in case of Ceibao 2, we are getting those old date of 1000 BC date, pre-1000 BC date. But after checking context sequence, I'm throwing away those. Then I'm putting the beginning of Ceibao, 950 or 1000. So I'm not necessarily trying to make my site older. So I'm pretty sure all those sites really dates to 1000 BC or slightly later. And particularly in case of Nakbe, it's interesting. Dr. Hansen wants to put this to 1000 BC. But if we look at his publication, earliest ceramics look like this. Also, Dr. Forsyth kindly showed me the early ceramics in the labs. It looks like this. Then this is a ceramic sequence of Seibao. Early ceramics, we have those post-slip incisions. This type of ceramics appear after 800 BC. So this one is almost identical to this one from Nakbe. This black pre-slip grooving, almost identical to this one from Nakbe. And I'm pretty sure those ceramics from Nakbe date period after 800 BC. And I understand that Dr. Forsyth is agree with this view. I'm not sure we can talk later, but. So if you look at published date, it looks like this. But I think it has to look like this. That's, I think, what radiocarbon tells us. And then similar ceramics really line up nicely. So this tells us that there was a major transformation around 1000 BC. It's not this gradual transition, but there's a major change at that time. Why did this change happen? That's a difficult question, but I think the maize is the main factor. So this is not what I said, particularly Dr. Clark said that, and then various other people said it, particularly from this analysis by Dr. Blake on the human bone from Pacific coast. So basically you analyze human bone and then look at this carbon isotope, and then if you have lots of carbon-13, that indicate probably the maize consumption. Their work shows that the early pre-classic time, they were not eating much maize. So maize was still not important. But during the middle pre-classic, maize consumption jumped. Then early Maya bones have about the same this carbon isotope value. Then classic time, they ate more. So Dr. Clark and other people said, but probably around 1000 BC, maize became very productive. So before that, Maya lowland is caustic lowland. It's not really good place to live. There's not much things to eat. There are not many people before maize became reliable crop. But once maize became reliable crop, they started to have lots of those communities with ceramics. So originally maize was tiny plants, so it was not productive. Then it took a long time to become this productive plant. So 1000 BC may have been very, very important threshold. So let me summarize the pattern so far. So I show this timeline here on this side. Before around 1400 BC, during early pre-classic period, there was a descent of San Lorenzo. Maya people still running around in the jungle, hunting animals, fishing, doing some cultivation, but not much. And then there was this ritual deposit of greenstone axes, but not in the cruciform shape. Then about 1100 BC, laventa probably declined, or at least San Lorenzo probably declined, or at least the influence of San Lorenzo retreated from this Chiapas or Pacific coast area. Then Pacific coast becomes an important part of development. There's this important site of Ojo de Agua, which is one of the earliest center with those mounds. This pattern has a sort of vague similarity to later Chiapas Pattern, and there might be some prototype here. Maya people are still doing hunting and fishing. Then, around 1000 BC, that was the major time of change. There's an important center of Finca Acapulco where Dr. Laurent worked, and then Ceibal emerged, and the other Maya center emerged. Then Ceibal was probably had an important contact with Chiapas area. So this area was probably important area of development with very close interaction during this time period. Then on the coast, there's a big site of La Blanca emerges with this big mound, big pyramid. So La Blanca had, at that time, had the biggest pyramid in this area. Then interesting thing is that it's also north-south line, but it was aligned to the volcano. So they built this big pyramid, basically recreating the volcano that they see in the back. So actually that's the pattern in the Pacific coast. La Blanca, this pyramid is aligned to this volcano, Tafmurco. Isapa can be a little bit later, that's aligned to Tacana. Tacaricabaf aligned to Siete Orejas. So the volcanoes are very important for those people. And then on top of it, they recreated volcano in their ceremonial areas. Then when we go to Chiapas, inland Chiapas and Ceibal, particularly in Ceibal, it's a Maya lowlands. There's no hills, no mountains. So that's a little bit different situation. So they didn't build this northern pyramid. Finca Acapulco, that's the early pattern. They didn't build this northern pyramid. Then, because mountains are probably not that important for those people. Then after 800, this pattern really exploded. You find many more centers. Then La Venta emerges. La Venta, well, and then Ceibal, we have more developed this form. And then probably by this time, we had the elite people. So La Venta, we have this pattern of this E group, which was, we have earlier examples at Ceibal, possibly in Finca Acapulco. Then La Venta built this northern pyramid. But in La Venta, in the north, what you have is a sea. So I don't think this pattern was originally created at La Venta. It must be this pattern developed in the south, where they have pyramid to the north. Then what La Venta did was they incorporated those early traditions from various areas. E group from this area, and then those pyramid from the south, and then they incorporated to create new pattern, emerging pattern. Then that got reintroduced probably some of the Chiapas centers. I see that Dr. Clark is not very happy, but maybe we can talk later. Then during this time, this cruciform cache spread throughout this area. Then many of Maya ceremonial complex emerged a little bit later, like this Tikal, Nakbe. Sibar could be a little bit earlier. But after 700 or around 600, we see the fully developed Chiapas Pattern Ceibal. I forgot to put one square here, but anyway. And then, outside of Ceibal, Tikal may be one of the earliest example which have the E group. But Tikal people just took the E group. They didn't take other elements of this Chiapas pattern. They didn't take those platforms. They didn't take these ritual practices of greenstone caches. They took just one element. So this tells us this is later. And then also, it's not just a direct influence. It's more like a local choice. Maya people just chose what they like and then incorporated into their symbolic system. So many of my colleagues want to make E group as a Maya creation, but I don't think so. Actually, Maya people adopted igloo from this western region. Then at the end, let me talk about the local process briefly. So as we go back to Ceibao, this is the sort of pattern of early period settlement. So this red area is where we find the remain of Real, which dates to 1000 to 700 BC. Blue area, we or Harvard people did excavation, but didn't find remain dating before 700 BC. Those all dates to later. So when Harvard did excavation, they didn't have further subdivision. But what we did is that we tried to subdivide this real period into 3 subphases. Then once you have final chronology, you can get new patterns. You start to see new pattern. So outside of residential area, we have some ceramics appearing during the real 2 times, but we don't have buildings. Those ceramics are right on the scraped bedrock. So they are a little bit more sedentary, but still they didn't have very permanent building. In other area, after we dig through later building, you get again scraped bedrock, and then they were making just those post holes to build those relatively ephemeral building with post in the ground type of building. So it was not very permanent building. Earliest example of a permanent building appeared during Escobar time around 600 BC. Then that becomes a pattern in the Maya Laurent. Then they stuck in one place. Then they don't move. They keep building over the earlier building. But that pattern didn't emerge until 600 BC. So this makes me think that there are many people who are still moving around after 1000 BC. So earliest period, Real 1, we have only remains in the ceremonial building. In outside, there's no evidence of this Real 1 occupation. But as I talked about it, there was already very substantial ceremonial construction. You need a lot of people to do that work. Where are those people? I think those people are actually still mobile, moving around, keeping some of the traditional way of life. Then after 800 BC, at least elite people are settled down. But outside of that, you have some of those remains, but just those ceramics. We don't have permanent buildings outside of areas. So outside people, those commoners are still, I think lots of people doing still lots of moving around, relying heavily on wild resources. Pattern changes around 600 BC. We have more of the residential remains. Blue area, it's excavated, but we don't have this remain of this period. So it was all gradual processes. Then this make me think that ritual construction didn't really happen at the end of the complete establishment of fully sedentary agricultural community. Actually happened at the beginning of this transition. Then those construction projects and public rituals probably brought together those different people. Some of them are elite with strong contact with Chiapas and then living in the fixed location. Other people still doing lots of moving around. But those people probably gathered for public construction and ritual processes. Probably there are people who didn't care about those things. So that created an opportunity to share certain activities and then also negotiate those different views of the world and the social views. Okay, I forgot to talk about this. Outside of Seibao too, you see this pattern. Before 800 BC, we have just a settlement in Seibao, in this bigger area. Before we built this refined chronology, people thought Altar de Sacrificio, that's another site excavated by Harvard, date to the same period as Seibao. But our chronology tells us that most of altar material dates to after 800 BC. So is the material from Pinta de Chimino and the other sites. So again, there's just a ceremonial building here, and then all those people are still not making permanent building. They are still moving around all this area. So let me conclude. So the difference, there's a substantial difference between the cases of Gebekli Tepe and Seibao in terms of dates and the situation. But this makes us think about the important question, anthropological question. So those ritual construction, the public ritual, don't necessarily appear at the end of this process of development of agricultural community. It can appear at the very beginning, then ritual becomes a very important process for the development of sedentary community itself. And then in terms of the chronology, there was a probably major gap between two major centers of San Lorenzo and the La Venta in Olmec area. That's something that Dr. Clark said earlier. I think that's the pattern. Then interesting change happened in this gap between San Lorenzo and the La Venta. After the decline of San Lorenzo, lots of those people from this area started to act. And they adopted some of the earlier elements, but also started to experiment with new ideas of society and rituals. And then that created a new form of social order. Then came La Venta. Then La Venta, so those big centers are not necessarily origin of all innovation. That happens in many cases in history. Often big center incorporates tradition from various parts of the world. United States is the good example. That's a very influential center of the culture and the economy and political power. But the United States incorporated all those cultural elements from various parts of the world and then created the new culture. Similar pattern may be happening in this case too. So thank you very much.
Do we have questions?
Yes, Dr. Johnson.
You mentioned the early deposits of greenstone axes. Do we have any idea as to why?
Why?
Why they deposited those axes?
That's difficult questions. Yeah. Yes. I think meaning of those things probably changed through time. Later time, probably those greenstone axes may have represented maize. Some of the later one have the carving of maize god. Particularly Dr. Carl Tauve talk about it. Probably that's true, but that's not the case early days, I think. Particularly El Manati, that's before 1000 BC. That's the time maize was not that important. Then, in case of El Manati, they were putting those axes in the spring, not in the ceremonial center. Then it was tied to general notion of earthly elements and fertility, but probably much more vague notion of nature and its fertility. Then after 1000 BC, Well, there's some other earlier example, like a case of Paso de la Armada, where you have those axes in the ceremonial centers. But this deposit of axes in ceremonial center becomes common after 1000 BC. So they adapted some of those earlier elements, but then they created a new form of ritual. Specific meaning is difficult to tell. It's anybody's guess, but at that time, probably meaning of those axes and deposit was probably changing. Yes.
So I wonder, could you fill out perhaps a little bit the social theory implications for this ritual preceding sort of increased sedentarism or urbanization?
Yes.
Is the idea that sort of people are sort of circulating in a semi-nomadic fashion and perhaps they develop a collective sense of ritual and that becomes like a metaphysical draw to sit down and stay in the same place? Like what's, I guess theoretically, what do you imagine happening there? What's the sort of incentives or the mechanism that,
Yes.
that incentive, that how ritual might draw people together in a
Yes. Yeah. That's really the interesting question. Yeah. That's really the central question, I think. Of course, there are certain things I'd like to emphasize. One is those hunter-gatherer people do rituals, public ritual. That's very important. And the hunter-gatherer people can develop sedentary way of life with pretty complex social organizations. So it's not that it's all those things happening at that time. There's a lot of those precedents in the Paleolithic period, but not the scale of those temple construction or stone monuments of Göbekli Tepe. Then this agriculture, transition to agriculture was certainly important. That's probably tied to new idea of community and also new idea of the land and nature. Of course, I cannot quite specify it. Then there's always probably two-way directions interplay between subsistence ecology and ritual worldview, those things. Then at the beginning of this agricultural transition, so some of those probably tradition of hunter-gatherer people got pretty much elaborated. And then that's partly because of larger community, but also ritual itself brought people together to the same place. So in that sense, so there was probably two-way direction between the growth of community and then the role of ritual. Yes.
I appreciate that answer. I was wondering, it reminds me very much of Richard Bradley's
Yes. Right.
theories of agriculture and monumentalism.
Yes.
And relationships and ideas of nature.
Yes.
So it sounds like then what's developing, would you say then, would it be as increased sedentism and decreased fragmentation, let's say, communities begin
Right.
to breed more, is restricted access to ritual space, to ritual knowledge, to these intellectual property rights, but really representing connections to powers.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Does that increasingly become the base on which stratification,
Yeah.
increased sedentism gets built? It's access to those who have specialized access to this ritual knowledge, to these ritual spaces that have accrued importance over time. Is that
Yes, yeah, thank you for the comment. Yeah, probably that's a very important aspect. With ritual, there was a very probably elaborate knowledge and also some skills to make those ritual objects. And then that carries a heavy social capitals. And that must have been very important to all people, attract people, and then also create social hierarchy. So you mentioned the Richard Bradley, That's a British scholar. That kind of argument is very common in Europe. And then certainly that's very important argument. But one thing I don't like about Bradley's theory and then many of those European scholars is that they try to make very clear difference between hunter-gatherer people and agricultural people. Hoda says that, Bradley says that you need a different worldview to have agriculture. But I don't think hunter-gatherer people are that different. Hunter-gatherer people settle down. There are many cases of hunter-gathering people settling down, making a pretty impressive construction, doing pretty impressive rituals. And then those things were already happening. And then among those hunter-gatherer people, there was those hierarchy based on ritual knowledge already happening. But still, it didn't get to the scale of some of those Neolithic societies. Then this importance of material, resources, natural resources, subsistence comes in. So we cannot explain everything by subsistence, but subsistence is still important, I think. Also, we cannot explain everything by ritual, but ritual is very important, I think. Yes, Dr. Forsyth.
In terms of the Maya moment, do you see this process working at a later time at other Maya sites that emerge, that the places that become important were probably early ritual centers, even
Yes.
though they weren't as early as Segal and weren't necessarily hunter-gatherer?
Yes, thank you. So the question was whether we see that those early centers become important center in later period. I think that's the pattern, partly because of the result of the way we do excavation, that we excavate the later important site, and then there might be other early important sites which didn't become important later on, so we don't pay much attention, but still, from what we know, that seems to be pattern. Then there's still the major, in terms of attachment to the place, there was a major break at Seibao. They scraped this soil and then threw away this old soil and started the new center. Then once you started that, they started to stay in one place and they start to build the ceremonial construction over earlier construction. That's actually pattern Chiapas de Corzo too. Even though they had the earlier occupation, they scraped the material around this time and then renewed this ceremonial center. But once it becomes a pattern that goes on, that becomes really the fixed idea in the Maya society. So in that sense too, there was a major change in worldview and then perception of the past. Then those early centers often continues on because of this practice of staying in one place, building in the same place, and then doing the ritual in the same place. And then also this early pattern of ritual sort of gave a template to the later Maya society in which ruler basically acts as a head priest who do the ritual performance for the rest of the community. I don't know if that answers your question. But yes, Eileen.
I have a little question about just your interpretation of Aventa. So
Yeah.
the dates for the radiocarbon dates that you were given were outside
Yes.
the center. So
Right.
and the cruciform caches are found in the north part in the ceremonial complex.
Right.
The earliest one is phase 2.
Yes.
For Laventa, but the area that you're comparing, the E group, has never really been excavated. So
Yes.
isn't it possible that it actually might have been an early ceremonial center in that, instead of complex A of Laventa being the earliest, that the E group was even earlier than some of that?
Yes, yeah. Certainly that's the valid point. I think La Venta is the biggest mystery in Mesoamerican archaeology, I think. There's only early excavations, and then chronology is not really great, and then report is not that great, and then we really don't know what's happening at La Venta. Relatively good evidence come from this settlement survey, so that's what I'm using. So I don't deny the possibility that there was those early E group or some of early construction dating before 800. That's certainly possible, or that may be the pattern, but we don't know. What we can say now is that there's not much population outside this ceremonial core. I think that's relatively clear. Then I don't see La Venta as influential center before 800 BC. Really, La Venta grows in terms of population and the residential area after 800 BC. And then that's the time La Venta becomes really the center of the world for this region. So really, the La Venta is the big mystery. Yeah. Yes.
My question kind of comes from a point of ignorance of the area, but it kind of seems like you have hunter-gatherers and then monumental architecture. Is there kind of any transitional where there's small communities that kind of transition through that?
Can you say that again?
Is there kind of smaller communities as they transition from hunter-gatherers and start settling down, or do
Yeah.
they just go straight into? And if so, is there any early patterning before they get kind of with similar patterns in that time period before we get to the monumental architecture?
Talking about Maya lowlands or general in the Maya lowlands.
Yeah.
Okay. So before 1000 BC, there's no big communities. Everybody's in the small communities, I think. Typically, so at least they didn't have ceramics and they didn't have permanent buildings from what we know. And then I don't think they were in a big groups. And again, this is a tropical area and caustic environment. There's not much to eat unless you are near the water, river or sea. Then there's not much resources to support big populations unless you have stable agricultural crop. So that was the pattern in this area. So people are living in the small groups, probably, but then the pattern changed around 1000 BC. Still not too big, but still those dispersed population probably gathered around Seibao or other ceremonial center, at least seasonally, to do ceremonial construction. Then they may have dispersed away. So transition is not just an immediate thing. So there was still this gradual pattern, I think. And so we don't even know actually there was much population in area around Seibao. We don't have any evidence for it. We don't have any archaeological site. Just those evidence come from, say, Belize. Because Belize, you have lots of these swamps and rivers, and then there's aquatic resources. Then they can live without much of agricultural crops. But still small group. Then in case of Seibao, either there was a very small group, and then started this with small group, or there was almost nobody. In that case, people may have come from various places, like Belize, and then this around the area, around Mirador and Nakbe, there may have been some people earlier. And then some people may have come from Chiapas. So actually that pattern is still not too clear, but the beginning was very small, I think. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, Tom.
My question is related to it as a practical problem.
Yeah.
Whereas hunters and gatherers are not invisible in other contexts.
Yes. Yeah, that's a certainly important question. So that's a still challenging thing. We hope to find some of those remain of those moving people, and then if we can do bone chemical isotope analysis, that will be that's still the key. Then, but there might be some other indications. One is that this area of Belize, where we have better evidence of this archaic population and the various those early sedentary communities. Then John Ross dug a cave site in Belize, Aktun Halal. Then what he found is that some of those remain of possibly hunter-gatherer people dating to a little bit after 1000 BC. And then also like a Kofa, those areas. I don't exactly remember the specific date. But he also argued that there were those hunter-gatherer mobile people after 1000 BC, when like quail and the cowpatch, those sedentary community was starting. Then, so that might be one of the line of evidence. But ultimate proof has to come from the human remains and the better archaeological context of those moving people. So what I'm talking about is just hypothesis. I fully admit that there's no proof for this view, but I'm based on circumstantial evidence. But I just don't see that there's whole society changing from one day to another, from this mobile way of life to settling way of life. Even in the many parts of the world, there is increasing evidence of this coexistence of mobile hunter-gatherer living right next to agricultural people. Particularly, Europe is the good case. There are lots of interesting data coming from Europe. There's a very good evidence that the hunter-gatherer people are right next to the agricultural people. Then pattern persist. And probably that kind of pattern happened in many parts of the world.
Do you not, wasn't there an area where you were talking about excavation in habitations that were not elite and having evidence of a more diverse subsistence and diet? People are using hunter-gatherer strategies and they're being semi-nomadic on the edges of
Yes.
these sites. Yeah, so there's one step of a bridge, I think, to the whole conclusion of the hypothesis, in that there are people on the edges of these dense urban centers
Right.
that are not, their life is not the same as the people
Yeah.
that live in the center of these.
Right,
dense
that's
centers.
right.
So
Mhm.
we have this in the United States. There are people that live in marginal circumstances
Mm.
that fish in streams.
Yes,
and
okay.
eat,
Right.
turtles and
Mhm.
this sort of thing. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. So I'm not denying the possibility of the earlier more fixed residencies, but at least, yeah, in many of those peripheral groups, what we found is not the typical final this Maya pattern. By final Maya pattern, I mean that the people are very fixed on one place. You have the house, next generation build house in the same place, bury the dead under the house. They are very attached to that place. We don't have that. So we start digging those houses. We see the layout of houses. The earliest one goes to the 600 BC. But there are ceramics dating early period. So which seems to show that those people use ceramics. It's more sedentary than previous period, but didn't have this custom of building over and over in the same spot.
They would be activity areas as opposed to
Yeah,
residential areas.
probably. But they see really clear that the occupation continues. So those things are cleaned up. So it's very hard to find that evidence. Yeah. Yes, John.
Can you talk about this being hypothetical?
Yes.
But you presented 4 or 5 models at the beginning, and what you're showing is that this hypothesis is superior to the other hypotheses that are on the table.
Hmm.
So even though your model is conjectural, you have better evidence for it than you have for the other models which have been proposed for the early Mayan
Yeah. Mhm.
projections.
Yes, basically that's my position. Really, we are dealing with really the period of very limited data. And because most other site, we don't have data pertaining to this period. We really we were determined to get that data by digging 8-meter pit, but most people don't do it. So of course, our data is not really representative, and yeah, but that's the nature of this period. Then we have to draw the best likely scenario from this limited data. Of course, I'm not denying dismissing other possibilities. Yes. Yes.
Do you have any burials from rail 1?
No. So actually, mortuary patterns are different. So they were not putting dead in the buildings in those early times. So often hunter-gatherer, that's what hunter-gatherer people do. They throw away those dead people. They don't want to deal with those dead people too much. They may put it in the caves, or they may put it in a faraway place, and they don't make shrines. They don't live with dead people. Later Maya people basically living with dead people. But so at the beginning, they are not putting dead in the building. Well, of course, if we dig more again, we may find something. But so far, we have found any of those other earlier remains. Probably, I think they are putting those dead people somewhere outside. The earliest one is Rare 3, 800 BC, but not many. The number increases after 600 BC.
I was just thinking that if you had burials from it or bone material,
Yeah,
you
certainly.
might be able to determine what their basic diet was.
Right. But yeah, that has to be again, that must be the final proof. But I'm not really optimistic about finding burials. I think that they are putting dead outside. Just in case of like Pacific coast, after this middle preclassic, you have this high carbon-13 individuals, but you had also low carbon-13 individuals, right? Which may reflect the people who are doing traditional dietary pattern, I understand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.